All right, welcome to a University of Maryland, Baltimore Strategic Plan Town Hall. I'm Alex Lukowski, Executive Director of Media Relations. It is so important that you're here today to participate in this process, to help craft a plan that will help all of us effectively contribute to the work of the university. These 5-year strategic plans can only be meaningful if they're well informed, and they can only be useful if they're shared and embraced by the whole community. That's why the co-chairs of the Strategic Planning Committee have asked everyone to participate in these town hall meetings. Now, we've had two previous opportunities like this one to weigh in on what is essentially the guiding document for the university's next 5 years. 2 months ago, we discussed proposals for an updated set of UMB core values, the underlying principles used to set priorities. A second town hall meeting at the end of April examined the strategic plan's proposed themes, the general areas of focus for our work. Well, today we're getting to the bottom of it all. If you'll remember the Cheshire Cat in his reply to Alice's question about which path she should take, that depends a good deal, the cat said, on where you want to get to. So we'll take another look at those themes, but this time with an eye to the objectives we hope to reach and the outcomes we hope to achieve. Because, as the cat would say, without a destination in mind, any path is just as good as another. Afterwards, of course, it'll be time for your voice to be heard. Please look for the chat button, select chat with host, and write your question or comment there. Don't wait. The whole program is about hearing what you have to say. When the time comes, we'll call on you by name, so please listen for that. I'll unmute your mic. You don't have to do anything but speak up. And if you want to remain anonymous, that's okay too. Just let me know. The program, as you may have just heard, is being recorded and will be posted on the UMB homepage, umaryland.edu, as well as the Strategic Plan webpage. Now let me introduce our co-chairs. Dr. Roger Ward is Interim Provost, Executive Vice President, and Dean of the Graduate School, and Judy Postmus is Dean and Professor in our School of Social Work. Roger and Judy, take it away.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks as always for that great introduction, that great setup. Always a hard act to follow. As always, I'm pleased to be joined by Dean Postmus, who has been my co-chair partner on this effort, and as always, it's a pleasure to be partnered up with her. Judy has the privilege today of driving the presentation, and so I'll lead off, then turn it over to Dean Postmus, and then come back to pick up on some of the themes and the outcomes. But let me start by thanking all of you, and for those of you who are participating today, for your engagement, and for many of you, your ongoing engagement, because we know many of you in the audience have participated in the 2 prior town halls that we have had, responded to our surveys, provided us input and feedback, and we greatly appreciate the engagement and the ongoing engagement. This is the last of the 3 town halls that we promised and committed to do on the strategic plan. I'll go over the timeline in a minute, and you will see that we're nearing the end of the planning process, and we remain optimistic that we'll get to our goal of adopting a new strategic plan for the university that will take us through 2026 by the end of this month being June. But I did want to start by thanking all of you for your engagement. I also didn't want to assume, however, that all of you participated in the town hall, or even if you did, that you remember all the steps that we covered over these past 6 months. So if some of this sounds repetitive to you as we go through it, think of it more as a refresher for those of you who've been engaged from the outset, and for those that of course weren't engaged, this might be your first full exposure to the strategic plan. Happy to provide you an orientation to what the planning process is, where we are now in the process, and how we intend to move forward. Judy, next slide, please.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the steering committee. This effort is a wide-scale, inclusive, collaborative effort, and Dean, Judy, and I couldn't do this without the support of a very, very committed group of individuals. You see their names here representing all the schools, most of, if not all of the central administrative units. Judy and I have the privilege of co-chairing the steering committee for this group. Dr. Gerald, President Gerald, put this group together over 6 months ago. Each of these individuals graciously accepted the charge and have been working tirelessly to get us to the point where we're pretty close now to adopting our next 5-year strategic plan. This group of individuals have been meeting every 3 weeks on a consistent basis and have done a lot of the heavy lifting to produce the content that we'll review with you today. And we also have a logistics committee. And again, together with myself and Dean Postmus, these individuals that you see here have been meeting weekly, and as well as participating in those steering committee meetings. And so we've been meeting on a weekly basis, early in the morning, once a week, to help manage the process, support the work of the steering committee. And again, without the effort of these individuals here, we would not have been able to even get to the point we are in the process. So thanks to the logistics committee for their good work and support. Next slide, please. Alexa is talking to me for some reason or the other. So here we are with the timeline. This is the timeline that's familiar to some of you, those of you who participated in town halls before. And it seems just like yesterday that we were in January talking about what we wanted to accomplish. And we're pleased to report that by and large, we've been able to stick to this timeline, and we're getting to the point where we would adopt our new strategic plan. But just to quickly review the steps to date, we started, of course, with a comprehensive review of our core values. This is the third strategic planning process that I'm engaged with. And when we started this inclusive, comprehensive strategic planning process over 10 years ago, when President Pullman first came to UMB, we always started with the review of core values. And so it was not any different in this strategic planning process, where we began the process by re-examining our core values. And this time around, we did make some comprehensive changes to our core values, not necessarily tossing out the old values and bringing in new ones, but evolving them is the language that we use. And Julie will talk about what those are and where we landed with these in a minute. And then once we got, and that was a heavy lift. In fact, that took a lot of time early in the process, January through March. We were very, very focused on the core values, because without those core values, we couldn't move forward to do anything else, because those are the values are what the things that we are anchored in. And so it was very, very important that we get those right, that we get input and feedback from the community, and we got a lot of it. And so we are grateful for that. Once we got past the core value process, we then pivoted and started focusing on the themes, and I'll talk about what those are, and strategic outcomes that would help bring these themes to life. Of course, during the process, we looked at our mission, our visions, like we already spoke about the core values, and we also looked at other influencing documents, or documents that influence us as an institution, the system strategic plan, for example, University System of Maryland, what MHEC, the Maryland Higher Education Commission, and the state expects of us as a state public institution, and so on. So we just wanted to make sure that our goals, our objectives, our strategies align with the goals of the state, of the University System of Maryland. And of course, we wanted to engage, and again, much thanks to our deans and vice presidents, our shared governance council, our faculty senate, staff senate, and student senate, who've all been very, very engaged in the process every step of the way, and countless others who have willingly participated and graciously shared and provided input and feedback. And so along the way, through these town halls, through surveys, many of you participated. We gathered information, we asked for your input, we got your feedback, very candid feedback, very spirited feedback, leading to very spirited conversations. All those things we threw into the hopper, took into consideration, and began fleshing out what the plan should look like. So where we are now, in mid-May towards the end of June, we're in the process. We're in the last lap here we're coming down the stretch, if you will, of working towards adopting a plan. And the last piece of it is really getting input and feedback, which is one of the reasons we wanted to meet as a group again and focus some on our themes and outcomes. Next slide, please. Judy.
So it's my turn. So we're going to talk a little bit about, do a quick review of the core values. So we've already been through a process where we've done lots of work with strategic steering committee. We've had the town hall on core values. We've done a survey on core values. We've taken all those documents. We talked to the deans and vice presidents, and we came up with a final set of core values. And so you can see, as Roger mentioned, that when we talk about core values, we talk about an evolution of those values, where the old values of civility and accountability have evolved into respect and integrity. We have a new value that wasn't part of our old values, which is well-being and sustainability. We have diversity evolved into equity and justice. We have excellence, knowledge, collaboration has evolved into innovation and discovery. And I'm going to spend a little time just reviewing. So when we talk about respect and integrity, what we mean is that we value each other and hold ourselves accountable for acting ethically and transparently using compassion and empathy. Some of these words for somebody that have been around before, compassion was one word, for example, that was suggested from the town hall on core values. And so we incorporated it into our definition and how we understand this core value. We have a number of synonyms for each of the core values, as well as another way of understanding what do we mean by these values. And so for respect and integrity, we have civility, accountability, transparency, ethics, compassion, and empathy. The next set of core values, which is a new set, is our well-being and sustainability. And this one is going to take a little bit of getting used to, because sometimes when you say the word sustainability, some people just automatically think of environmental friendly. And yes, that's part of it, but that's not the only thing. And so we combine these two together because we define it as that we care about the welfare of our people, planet, communities, and university. It is a sense of caring for one another and supporting our world and our climate and everything in it then which we live. So some synonyms to understand and capture the fuller narrative around these terms include work and academic life balance, environmentally friendly, responsible stewardship of resources, family friendly, mindfulness, gratitude, and embrace optimism. So again, this is a new set of values for us, and one that we have. And I believe it's new because of COVID, because of the things that have happened in the last year or two in our lives, that this has really come to bear as we start thinking about, well, where do we want to be 5 years from now? And some of the lessons learned over the last 2 years. The next set of core values is we evolved from diversity into equity and justice. And by that, we mean that we embrace and are committed to diversity, and we value inclusive and just communities. We oppose racism and oppression in all its forms. And some synonyms to capture that include diversity, inclusion, social justice, anti-racist and anti-oppression, embrace differences, anti-hate and anti-bias, and cultural humility. In long conversations we've had around this particular value was one where diversity was a great value 10 years ago when it was first instituted in the institution, but that in the events that have sparked and moved our country in the last number of years, that we really believe that we need to move beyond just diversity and then be more inclusive and focus on equity and justice as a value that should permeate everything that we do as a university. The next core value evolved from excellence, knowledge, and collaboration, where we're into innovation and discovery. And by those terms, we mean that we imagine and explore new and improved ways to accomplish our mission of research, education, and service. And that's in synonyms to capture these core values include creativity, discovery, agility, novel thinking, teamwork and partnership, taking risks, learning from mistakes, exploring new opportunities, being influential, developing leaders, and entrepreneurship. So this is also a way of, as in the last couple of years, of learning that we really, yes, we do research, yes, we do education, yes, we do service, but we really need to think about how can we be as innovative in the work that we do as a university, and how can we have our minds and eyes open to discover new ways of doing things. Certainly the pandemic, the COVID pandemic has taught us some of this, to think about how do we do our work? How do we function in meetings? How do we function as units in schools? And it's really helped us think about how do we discover new ways in thinking about what we do, and then being able to be influential as a university in our world, whether the world is the local Baltimore community, the state, the country, or globally. One of the other things that people question us is, you see, these are our 4 sets of core values that will guide us. Instead of having 7 individual core values, we now have 4 sets. And the question that came up, well, what happened to leadership from the last set of core values? So we see leadership as an overarching umbrella, as something that we should be, as individuals, as schools, as units, as administrators, as a university, be able to demonstrate leadership in all that we do in all of our core values. So we haven't forgotten it, we haven't neglected it, but we really wanted to have a conversation that the core values have to be reflective of everyone on our campus. That means everyone from the president on to the lowest paid employee on campus. And does leadership as a value mean much to all individuals and all employees who are part of UMB? And when we were talking about that as a group, what we found is that leadership influences, permeates, as part of, but as a standalone core value, it wasn't as necessary because it doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. So as we look at these 4 sets of core values, we anticipate and hope that everyone at the university, every faculty, staff, student can feel and be part of implementing these core values and demonstrating them in their behavior.
Thank you, Judy. And so now with the core values set, we pivot to our strategic themes. And let's talk about the language in our strategic plan and put some definition to what we mean by theme, objective, outcomes, and so on. So we have what we call an outcomes-based strategic plan, and that's the approach we have used for the current plan that we're in, and certainly that we're keeping for this particular plan. So in our strategic planning design, we start at a very high level with the theme. And the theme is a major area of focus for the university, influenced by our mission, vision, and core values, which is why we spend so much time, especially on the core values, and making sure that they were consistent with our mission and vision as an institution. So you could think of the theme as a big bucket. And under this strategic plan, as you will see, we have 6 of those buckets. So the theme is the bucket. So I'm going to stick with that metaphor for a minute. A strategic objective comes under the theme. So each theme is going to have a strategic objective, and we'll walk through what these proposed themes are, objectives are, and outcomes in a little while. But you will see that under each theme, and at this point, the themes are pretty well set, again, with input from the university community, we have a strategic objective, and this is where we need your input. We'll ask for it on this session, but also provide you the opportunity through a survey to provide us with input on the strategic objective. So each team is going to have a strategic objective, and you sort of think of that objective, sticking with this bucket metaphor, if I could call it that, as a long-term organizational goal. It sort of gives color, if you will, to what we want this bucket to look like and what are we aiming for. So a strategic objective, and there will be only one strategic objective under each theme, is a long-term organizational goal that puts the theme into context and brings it into sharper focus. So that's what a theme is. And when you see the themes that have been drafted, it'll give you a sense of a better sense of what it is. And then under each theme, we have a set of strategic outcomes, and these will be multiple. So in most cases, there are 6, so anywhere between 4 and 6 strategic outcomes. And what a strategic outcome is, it's what we aspire to 5 years from now at the end of this current strategic plan. That if we are successful in pursuing these aspirations, these are the things that we would have accomplished. These things would represent the outcome under each of our themes. So think of these outcomes as things that we would put into the bucket 5 years from now, or that we're hoping that would be in our bucket 5 years from now, because we were successful in achieving them. And then the goals, which actually are the ways in which we go about as a university at the level of the school, at the level of our administrative unit, of getting to the strategic outcomes in our strategic plan. And that's where, as we like to say, the rubber meets the road, because this is where the deans and the vice presidents then take up the effort and say, all right, what goals, what priorities, what strategies should we at the school level, at the administrative unit level, put in place to help the university get to these strategic outcomes. So that's just an orientation to the language we use. These are the themes from our current strategic plan, and this current plan expires June 30th of this year, by which time our new one will kick in. So we had 6 themes under this current strategic plan, 6 buckets, and you see them listed here. Next slide, please. These are the strategic themes for the new strategic plan that will become effective July 1. And indulge me as I read through some of this, because much of this is new for a lot of people, and some of it has evolved based on feedback and input that we have gotten through the surveys that people participated in. So first theme is, first bucket, community partnership and collaboration. Second, university culture, engagement and belonging. Student growth and success, innovation and reimagination, global engagement and education, core values, and by that we mean the integration and holding ourselves accountable, integration and accountability as it relates to our core values. Just as is the case with our core values, speaking of core values, these themes don't wander too far away from themes in our current plan, but they do evolve from those themes and move us further along the spectrum in terms of remaining focused on our mission and vision. Next slide, please. So the first theme, the first bucket, the objective. And again, everything that is going to be presented from here on in, especially as it relates to the objective and the outcomes, we want feedback on. We want your input on. And again, the survey that you will have access to, you probably already do, knowing Alex, but you certainly will have continued access to it beyond this session for at least another week. We want to get your input on these objectives and these outcomes that follow. So all of this is still in draft form, but as we have been doing along the way, we want to put it out in front of the community, get people's reaction in real time, and then get people to provide us feedback. We will then take that feedback and evolve them. So by the time you see the strategic plan at the end of this month, I guarantee you, this objective is going to read differently. But this is where we are now, and so we want to be transparent with where we are. So again, indulge me, grounded in health equity, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and social justice, UMB will formalize a university-wide approach to community engagement and scholarship that dismantles systemic racism both inside and outside our campus. We will foster inclusive and equitable partnership with our neighbors across the human lifespan and model the embodiment of anti-racist and anti-oppressive practices in higher education. We strive to incorporate the values of equity and justice in the teaching service programs and research at UMB with the goal of achieving joy and hope in our society. If that sounds aspirational, it is intended to be. That is why it's a big, bold, forward-looking objective. Next slide, please. And I won't read all of these, but I've taken the liberty of highlighting some of the phrases in each of these outcomes. So remember, the outcomes are now the things that we aspire to have accomplished by 2026. So if we are successful in populating this bucket of community partnership and collaboration, 5 years from now, we would have become a trusted partner with resources and have strengthened our relationships with our neighbors in West Baltimore and throughout the region. That's the idea behind outcome number one in this under this particular theme, right? We would be encouraging the use of evidence to measure our impact of UMB's health, legal, social work, economic development programs. We would have a culture that values and rewards research and teaching where that research and teaching is grounded in community engagement. These are all things that we aspire to as outcomes. We will seek to learn and understand better. 5 years from now, we'll get to the point where we understand better, right, and are able to repair some of our missteps in terms of how we have engaged as an institution with our communities in the past. And of course, we would have strengthened strategic partnerships with other USM institutions. And what we aspire to is to become a model for collaboration as an institution. And that we would have an organizational structure here at the university that supports all these efforts. Second theme, university culture, engagement, and belonging. And here the objective is to create a sustainable culture of care that engages and embraces all members of UMB and the broader community through respect, collaboration, service, and communication that fosters belonging, understanding, trust, and equity. Again, aspirational, but necessarily so. What we're hoping to accomplish along the way, and hopefully by the time we get to the end of this planning cycle in 2026, that we would have a campus climate that celebrates completely and in a very inclusive way who we are as an institution, where we were promoting social justice, equity, and diversity. We would have a university that is intentional about identifying opportunities, that is intentional about planning, setting goals, and has a decision-making process that is inclusive, that we would have created space, and that we would acknowledge and value all groups within our organization, and that we would provide and be intentional again and routinely be providing professional and educational activities that helps every member of our community, faculty, staff, students, build cultural competence and demonstrate a sense of respect for individuals. That we will be an interconnected community, again, where people focus on our mission and pursue our mission in a respectful way. We'll again embrace our history and work to mitigate the damages caused by missteps along the way. And that when we communicate, whether in writing, verbally, however we communicate, that our communication is empowering, inclusive, and demonstrates cultural competence. Student growth and success, very, very important for us. This is a classic example of one of the themes that carried over from actually the first strategic plan that we did in a comprehensive way. Students, as President Pullman, when he was president here, used to like to say, they're the reasons, our students are the reasons any of us are here. And so the objective here is to design and implement collaborative, inclusive, respectful, and accessible academic learning environments that equitably support and develop students to become exemplary professionals and purposeful contribute to society. And you see our outcomes here. We want to make sure that UMB is accessible to students of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, regardless of income level and how they identify socially. We want, of course, our students to be models of being anti-racist, promote anti-oppressive policies and practices in everything that we do, to make sure that our students are well cared for in and outside of the classroom. We want to embrace innovation and innovative ways in which to educate our students, to make sure that the education that they continue to receive here, it's already distinctive, but we want to make sure that it becomes even more so, and we want to find innovative way to accomplish that. And we want to make sure that we promote activities inside and outside of the classroom that promote social responsibility in our students and cultural humility in our students. And we want our students initiative that fosters, that allows our students to passions and their skills to shine through. And of course, we want to, when our students graduate and become alumni, we want them to remain engaged because they remain invested in our mission. Innovation and reimagination, Dean Postmus mentioned one of our core values, well-being and sustainability, being really influenced by our experience over the last year with the pandemic. Well, I would suggest that this particular theme was also highly influenced by our experience, because we had to all pivot and find and learn and get more comfortable with a different way of working and learning and teaching and so on. And so this objective seeks to capitalize on our learning and encourage us to foster an agile, creative, risk-tolerant learning environment, boldly capitalizing on new opportunities, technologies, and the power of collaboration to discover meaningful solutions to complex problems impacting UMB and its strategic partners and communities. And again, if we're successful, and we absolutely intend to be, we want to embrace technology and emerging technologies and be thought leaders in the way we use data to inform decision making, to drive success across our student education, our research, and how we function operationally as an institution. We want to encourage bold thinking. We want to reward unconventional ideas. We want to move away from where someone who might put an idea out there that seems unconventional isn't shunned, but embraced and say, wow, let's think about that. Let's see how much merit there is to that, and take bold steps to accomplishing our goals and objectives, recognizing that, of course, that with boldness comes some risk. We want to encourage collaborations as we take on these big challenges, because that's the only way we could dismantle some of these challenges that we're dealing with. And as we engage in research and produce scholarship, we want to disseminate what that scholarship. We want to share our discoveries to improve the human condition, which of course is consistent with our mission. And we want to, of course, as spoken to earlier, we want to continue to and excel and become a model for using the best practices in teaching to prepare our students for the opportunities of the future, but also to properly equip them to deal with the challenges of the future. And we want to also be a place where a diverse group of faculty and diverse members of the faculty would want to come here. And we want to be intentional about attracting faculty and students from a diversity of background. And we want to create, of course, a collaborative and administrative environment, supportive environment. Global education, this is another space that we wanted to make sure that we invested our efforts in and establish some boldness around. So we seek to enhance our impact and reputation as a globally engaged research institution. We're already committed to improving the human condition. We want to partner with our domestic and international partners and collaborators, and we will strengthen and invest in interdisciplinary, innovative learning, teaching, program implementation, research, and dialogue in pursuit of equitable, just, and sustainable solutions to global challenges. That's who we want to we aspire to be as a globally engaged institution. And in order to do that, we want to make sure that all our students have an opportunity to engage in global learning. We want to make sure that we are making good leverage our resources here, increase our resources here to support these big, bold global efforts. We want to value and support and celebrate the richness of our international students, scholars, and faculty that we depend so heavily on to make us successful as an institution. And of course, we want to provide a robust operational support infrastructure to support these efforts. And we want to be able to tell our story in a coherent and intentional way. Like I said, we do a lot currently in global education and engagement, but we haven't really been strategic and, again, intentional about positioning ourselves as a global powerhouse, or the global powerhouse that we are internally and externally. And we want to be better at that by the time we get to 2026. And of course, the sixth bucket is integration and accountability, core values, integration and accountability. And this one is special in my mind because this is a doubling down on our core values. And we thought it was important to establish it as a theme because we want to make sure that as an institution, our core values aren't just words on a banner or painted on the walls in a garage. It's what we live by. And so this theme is very, very important to us. So we want to systematically integrate our core values into the organizational culture through demonstrated behaviors and education so that internal and external stakeholders clearly understand who we are as an organization and what we stand for. Our core values need to be the cornerstone of decision making and in identifying the behavior to which we all would be held accountable. And the outcomes here that we aspire to is that the leaders, of course, of the institution, myself, Dean Postmus, the president, the other deans, the other vice president, will model this commitment to our core values. And in modeling that commitment and those behaviors, that we would lead the way or help lead the way in building them into our organizational culture. And we want to be able to articulate the behaviors that we expect to flow from each set of our core value. And we want to make sure that there is a commitment to educating ourselves continuously as to and reminding ourselves what our core values are. And for those transient populations that we have in our community, like our students who are with us only for a short period of time, as students come and go, we want to make sure that we're intentional about always educating individuals, faculty, staff, and students as to our core values. And we just need to operationalize our core values and have them reflected in everything that we do across all our administrative units. And then, of course, finally, use data to demonstrate and in an earnest way and a transparent way how well we're doing in terms of embedding our core values. So that's a lot. I think I said it at the top, which is why you see why we absolutely want your input and feedback, especially as it relates to the objectives under each of the themes and those outcomes under those themes. A lot of work and effort obviously have gone into fashioning the drafts that you see here, but as I stated before, still a lot of work to do to evolve them, and that's where your input is going to be useful. So the next step, feedback. We're imploring you, we're asking you to provide us with that candid feedback as you have been doing all along the way through this town hall, through the survey, through the small groups in the units that the steering committee members are leading in the schools and administrative units. We'll take that feedback, we'll synthesize it, and as we have done with the core values, as we have done with the themes, we'll revise the strategic objectives, we'll revise the strategic outcomes, and then we'll present it to university leadership, our deans, our vice president, and the president, of course, for ratification and then final adoption of the plan by June 30th. So that's the ambitious, bold plan. We're in the final stretch, and thanks to all of you, we've been able to get to this home stretch, and we're asking for your asking you to indulge us one more time and provide us feedback so we could get to the finish line.
Well, if I can just interject, we do have several people who are asking specifically how can they contribute to the objectives or the outcomes or the goals of the various themes. I know I've sent the link out to the survey a couple of times to the audience. We'll send it out again. But how do they contribute?
So one of the ways I'm going to jump in that the survey is crafted is because, as you can see, this is a lot, right? You have 6 themes, you've got objectives, and then you've got we challenged the group to come up with 4 to 6 outcomes. You saw that there were more. So we still need to synthesize and figure out how to make this work. So in the survey, you don't have to do all of it. It's going to ask you questions in general about the objectives, but then you could pick and choose which ones you really want to focus in on. You can do all of them, and you'll have some closed-ended liker type questions that you can answer, but there's also space for you to provide some qualitative feedback on outcomes, on the objectives. All of that will be available through that survey. So that would be, the survey is going to be the best tool for you to get your information to us.
And there's also, that's absolutely the best tool. The steering committee members are also charged with going back to their schools or administrative units and facilitating conversation. They get to curate that however they want, maybe focus groups, large group presentations, so you could provide feedback and input that way as well.
Okay, we have an anonymous question here about measuring success. How are we going to measure success as we go along? And are we going to get regular reports? How are we doing in the current plan? How can we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was, somebody said it, maybe Steve Jobs, I probably misquoting that, but he said, what gets measured gets done. And so absolutely, we're gonna measure this, and we're gonna measure the hell out of it every step of the way. We do that now, by the way, in our current strategic plan. Our Office of Institutional Effectiveness does that. Greg Spengler, Karen Matthews, and that team spend a great deal of their time doing just that. So, and the schools and the deans and the vice presidents are very responsive in that way. Every quarter, they provide us, I mentioned the goals up front, and the goals are what get adopted at the level of the school and administrative units. And so every quarter, as a vice president, I have to report on those goals that I adopted, how I'm doing, what progress I'm making along a continuum of 0 to 100% of being complete. And then that feeds in, because every goal that I write in my unit has to be tied to a specific outcome in the strategic plan and mapped to a specific theme in the plan. So it all rolls up, and we put out quarterly reports on how we are doing as an institution. And so if you go on our website right now, you could see our progress under the current strategic plan, and we'll continue to do that with this plan.
That's great. Let me bring in Donald Donahue, who has a question about something you talked about a little while ago. Donald, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Excellent. I was struck by the growth and success slides and the discussions, but certainly for students. But why limit that? Why shouldn't that be global? Faculty, staff, and community.
Make sure you fill out the survey. That's a great point. Was it Donald? That's a great point. Of course, we are laser focused. I'll confess. I'm in the role of the interim provost. I'm also the dean of the graduate school. I came up as a student affairs professional. I'm always laser focused on students and student success and the student experience. It doesn't mean that I don't care about the experience and the growth and the development of faculty and staff as well. But of course, students are a top priority, and I say that unapologetically. and so there is always a laser-like focus on our students. But that point is very well made. I think, however, in some of the other outcomes that we have, that it does get to, that when we talk about belonging and so on, that's focused on faculty, staff, and students. So we are hoping that some of those outcomes does get us to the point where we are supporting faculty and staff, that they're growing and developing as well. But your point is taken in terms of perhaps having a sharper focus on that.
And it was one that was debated with the steering committee. It was one of, well, why is it only students? Why don't we want to see growth and success of faculty and staff and communities? And so, and the discussion that Roger had is that we saw it embedded in other themes. So like, especially the well-being and sustainability and the culture. So I think that as you look at the themes, look to see on the survey, if there's stuff there that you're like, okay, it does address it, it's just not in these specific words, or we really do need to make it less about only students, but do it, the UMB family, or however we want to define it, the growth and success of all involved. So, so I'm curious so please give us your feedback through the survey.
Great. We have another anonymous question. So much of what we talk about in the strategic plan is viewed through a prism of sort of what you do, what your school does, what your mission is, what you're studying, what you're teaching. So she writes, some of the objectives and themes are very concise, but others are a little lengthy. Will there be an effort to make sure they are sufficiently broad and fully inclusive to allow schools and groups to identify their own goals?
You want to go with that, Judy?
Sure. This is where, again, we need your support in filling out the survey. When we first saw this draft, I was like, whoa, okay. So there's a lot of outcomes. There's a lot of redundancy. There's some concerns perhaps about, we tried to ensure that when we talk about diversity and talk about anti-oppression, it's not just racism, it's not just focused on race, but on all forms of oppression, regardless of background and identity. So I think that having, again, if those of you that are listening, when you're writing and spending time writing articles, sometimes having somebody else take a look at what you've written with a clean, fresh set of eyes can help us really go, oh yeah, this is a better way to say this. So that's why we need your support as you do the survey, to really have that lens of, are we open enough that the schools and units can get the job done? But are we clear enough and succinct enough to really come across so we're not so wishy-washy, but that we actually have a plan. So it is a fine line, and we can use all the support of the audience and others of the university.
And you are seeing the sausage being made. So this is not, especially as the objectives and the outcomes, these aren't polished final statements at all. They came from 6 different working groups, and you could see that in the phrasing and the way they're organized, the length, the number, and so on. So we're going to use your input, your feedback to figure out how to polish everything that was just presented. And hopefully by the time we get to the final plan, it reads clearer and is more inclusive. I think it's inclusive now, but that becomes more apparent as we refine the language and look for consistency in the way these things are stated.
Just in line with what you were saying about, what gets measured gets done, is an anonymous question about PDPs. Are there plans for these core values or in some way to manifest themselves in the PDP so that we're all judged in part based on our contributions to the core values?
Yeah, yes. I mean, and I think that's where, when the core values were done 10 years ago, there was a lot of fanfare, and that they are, the 7 values, and they're on the banners, and we saw them, but they didn't necessarily permeate into everything that we do, including PDPs and other areas of work and life at the university. And so this is where we decided as a steering committee, and it was strongly recommended, because I think the first round it wasn't included, but a really strong discussion, and I think this came out of the last town hall when we talked about core values, of how are we going to see it in everything that we do. And PDP is one example where we need to put it in there. And so this is why this is its own theme. This is why there's outcomes. This is why there's going to be strategies on every school and unit of how we're going to incorporate this. So even the HR unit will have to come up with how will they incorporate these core values in what they do. And clearly PDPs falls in their realm. So especially since I know I just finished some with some of my team, I think it is important to include them as part of it. So thank you for that suggestion and keep making it.
If I didn't know better, I would think that anonymous person was Dawn Rhodes, because we've heard it so much from Dawn, Dr. Dawn Rhodes, who's our Vice President and Chief Business and Finance Officer. It warms her heart, I'm sure, to hear that question, get that comment, because she has been our biggest proponent of making sure that we build them into these accountability mechanisms that we have, including our PDP, so that they really become integrated. So you could rest assured that there will be an effort towards that.
Well, you'll be happy to know that Dawn writes, it does warm my heart. So she's in the audience. Yeah, absolutely. But she's not the only one. People do, core values have a way of being something that you can always, touch onto and talk about, civility, for instance, and how you express that. And now it's evolving, but it does probably play more of a role than we suspect in PDPs, but some formalized approach, I think, is what the questioner was writing about. Another anonymous question, and I love the fact that we're able to provide anonymity, but there are times where I wish we could really hear from people, because the questions, there's so much there that they don't really know what they're getting at. But I'm going to read this to you. She writes, what about the dimensions of diversity that are not embraced under anti-racism or anti-oppression? Is there a discussion to make sure inclusion is inclusive?
Yes.
What do you think?
I mean,
Oh,
we talk
come on.
about all forms of different identities, different cultural belonging, differences based on gender, race, ethnicity, abilities, sexual orientation. I mean, we could keep going down this list, right? That we do mean that. And so I think that some of the challenge might be to make sure that we articulate it without being so wordy that we cover it every single time, but to maybe provide some definition of what we mean when we say anti-oppressive. Because, if you're in a group that is oppressed, it could be any number of groups, right? So, and multiple groups. There's also the intersection between groups, right? That I might feel oppression as a woman in one situation, but not in another as a white woman, and in another situation as a lesbian. I mean, so there's all these different phenomenons and roles that and groups that we are part of. And so yes, it's important that we are covering all of it. And how do we best articulate it in a way that isn't so, again, so too wordy, but yet clear enough that we know what we're saying. So we think we are, but if that's not the case, then by all means, in the survey, be more specific and tell us where we can be more specific and where it makes the most sense.
And I don't mind the comment at all and welcome it, because we've heard it a few times, and notwithstanding our effort, obviously, it's still a concern or an observation. And so we absolutely appreciate the comment, because we've had so much conversation about what the appropriate words are that we should use and adopt. And even as we grapple with the language is evolving. And of course, as a progressive institution, a forward-looking institution, a responsive institution, we want to make sure that the language we're using is relatable and appropriate, but that people see themselves in the language as well. So the input is valued.
You got a great response from Deborah Levy, who wanted me to remind you about accessibility, and you did mention that, Judy, and that's so important to be part of, as you say, part of the language, part of what we think about. What about incoming? We have students come in every year, new students, new people who maybe are not as familiar with these processes, and staff and faculty, of course. How do we get this message to them about the plan, about what's in the plan, about our goals and the outcomes that we hope to have, about our core values? Are we doing enough, and how do we get that word to them?
So when you start having conversations in your school or unit, ask that same question, because that's where it comes down to the operationalizing it, right? Making it happen, making it come to life. We'll have it on a website. We'll have it available for anybody to read. It'll be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean students will do it. And really what they need to see is us, having it posted in our schools and units, having discussions around it, putting it in our syllabi, having, and this is where the different units and schools have to have these conversations of how will we make it real to our faculty, our staff, and our students. And every school might do it differently, and every unit might do it differently. And some might be the same thing. So this is where, again, when we start thinking of what are the goals that are measurable and we can look at, that those are the kind of conversations that we need to have. So keep asking that question because it's a good one.
Yeah, and Judy and I are both deans, and when we do, from my point of view, this should show up in our marketing materials.
Mm-hmm.
When we try to recruit students to come here, we should be crystal clear on what our values are, what we stand for as a school, as an institution, and that should be clear. And because students need to understand that, so when they get here, there is that expectation of this is what we expect from you relative to our values and ethos and what have you. And that should be reflected in our, as Judy said, in our curriculum, in our co-curricular programming, and everything that we do here. We really do need to live these values.
I know we're just about out of time, but I've been communicating with someone in the audience who wants to say something, and I think it's worth taking just a moment. Go ahead. She's going to remain anonymous. Go ahead and tell the co-chairs what you told me. I've unmuted you. Oh, she's not speaking. Well, she said to me she feels like there's a constant fear of saying or doing the wrong thing and being judged for it, not for who I actually am, but what folks see, and that we're more than our appearance. And so, how do we make sure that that is recognized when we talk about inclusivity?
So this is to your point earlier about hearing directly from someone to get a better sense of what they mean. It would have been really good to hear directly from them. I'm not sure how to answer that question, but that's exactly what we're striving for. We want, when we have that theme of belonging, we want everyone, to feel a sense of belonging, regardless of where they're from, how they show up, how they look. There should be a sense of belonging here at the institution, and I would not suggest at all that we're there as an institution, but that's what we're aspiring to. And we would depend on people like the caller to help us get there along the way.
Yeah, it looks like she was having a technical issue, but maybe the thing to do, if you have that kind of question where you could really explain it a little more thoroughly, and because we do want to hear what you have to say, is to participate in the survey, and I'm going to send that out again right now, and please try to explain what it is you're trying to get across. So that might be a good way to do it.
So Alex, are we fresh out of time?
Well, I guess we are. I'm going to send the survey one more time for people to capture it who maybe didn't before. And there it is. And yes, I guess we've come to the end of our time.
So thank you all so much for the engagement, the great question, the great comments, and we do hope you take the time to complete the survey. As Dean Postmo said, you could focus in on any one theme and provide us feedback on that if that's what is of interest to you, or you could do all 6. So we've made it very accessible, and so that you could provide us the feedback you want to provide us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.